Hi, Acadiana. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Hopefully you're having a great Friday so far. This is the weekend edition of Let's Talk Tropics as we try to kick off a big weekend here in Acadiana. Another hot one out there. Not a whole lot to talk about in the tropics other than Hurricane Ernesto, but we're going to do some searching and look at some of the extended models to see if there's going to be any kind of a pattern change that might start to push anything closer to our direction. But right now, I think for the weekend, we're going to be in good shape. Real quick look outside. It's 93 degrees. That dew point at 77, so our heat index is already at 107 degrees with a 60% relative humidity and a light breeze out of the northeast at 7. We've started this broadcast at noon here for the last several days with a calm wind, so at least there's somewhat of a breeze out there. And I do think we're going to catch a little more activity with showers and thunderstorms later on today, but we still have that heat advisory that's in place. And as you saw, those heat index values are already at 107 and could push as high as 112 a little bit later on this afternoon. And there's a good amount of moisture that's available in the atmosphere. There is a little bit of a cap to overcome. That's where you see this red line kind of going upward on the scale. That's a bit of a temperature inversion. It's not a big inversion, but once the air is able to start to rise and break through that cap, we should be able to see some good lift and probably some bigger thunderstorms late this afternoon. I don't think it's going to start as early as what we normally think of the afternoon thunderstorm. Like what we saw yesterday, we had quite a bit of activity develop to our east and then drifted off toward the west. And I was just reading the National Weather Service's discussion because of the later blow up of thunderstorms expected today. There's going to be a little bit more energy. So like yesterday, a couple of these thunderstorms could produce some powerful winds and a lot of thunder and lightning to go with it. So get ready for that later today. But right now, everything's nice and quiet out there. You can see some cumulus clouds starting to billow out there over some of our traffic cams, but the roadways are dry. And so far as any rainfall in the Acadiana region, most of the action has been right there along the coast of Vermilion Parish and also Cameron Parish, then pushing offshore as well. We'll kind of grab the New Orleans radar and see what we've got there off toward the southeast. But I do think we're going to start to see a little bit more development in this particular area here, and then it's going to be starting to drift off toward the west, just like what we saw yesterday. So keep that in mind that I think most of the afternoon will be fine, but you might start to get into the action here by the latter part of the day and getting into the afternoon commute as well. So let's take a quick look at Ernesto that is moving off of my Caribbean satellite and almost off of my East Coast satellite. It is getting closer and closer to Bermuda, but here's the floating satellite, and I'll kind of circle where Bermuda is so you have an idea of where this tiny island is right there, kind of pulling out of the circle. But there in those last frames, you can see where Bermuda is and you can see where the center of Ernesto is. And Ernesto, we think, has gone ahead and peaked out on its wind speed and its intensity. The pressure coming up just a little bit over the last update here. So it might have peaked out. It'll get close to Bermuda with winds probably in the Category 2 range before making its way northward. There is going to be a bit of a slowdown here. It's still moving to the northeast at 14, but one trough is going to miss it. There's another trough that will be coming off the east coast later on this weekend that will finally give Ernesto the kick it needs to ride its way back out into the Atlantic Ocean. But there are still some chances that it's going to clip the far eastern parts of Newfoundland before it starts heading back out to sea. And it could be a pretty significant low pressure area once it crosses the Atlantic and could bring some pretty rough stuff over toward the British Isles maybe about a week from today. As far as the intensity models, most are in agreement keeping this as a Category 2, maybe dropping it off to a Category 1 here for a little while over the next 24 to 36 hours and holding it as a Category 1 hurricane before becoming extratropical farther down the road. And once we get out to day 5 right here, most models drop this down to a tropical storm or probably even a non-tropical low pressure area once it starts to exit the region and head off toward the northeast. So all four models, the global models that we look at, I will say, are pretty much exactly the same when it comes to handling Ernesto, moving it over the small island of Bermuda, and then clipping Newfoundland before moving out into the Atlantic Ocean. But I also wanted to go out 10 days, even though the GFS model goes all the way out to the beginning of September. I kind of want to focus on the next 10 days because the Euro and the Canadian all go out 10 days. The Icon model only goes out for 7. So we're going to look at these all together because there's something that might be a little interesting on here other than Ernesto making its way out of the way. You've probably heard in the weather forecast that there's going to be a bit of a front that's going to be coming over the eastern half of the country, and the bulk of the drier air is going to be dropping down over portions of Florida, which is going to leave a frontal boundary kind of edging its way backwards into the region sometime early next week. For us, we're going to be seeing some slightly drier air, so even though temperatures are expected to stay in the upper 90s, with that drier air mass, the heat index value may drop off. But at the same time, there's going to be this frontal boundary that's going to be kind of hanging here over the eastern Gulf of Mexico and the western portion of the Atlantic. So if that stalls there, occasionally you can get something to develop along that front. And even though the GFS is showing a lot of moisture in that particular area about a week from today, it's not really showing pressures lowering too much. And the same goes with the European model. Although it's got Ernesto making its way off toward the northeast and going away, it also is indicating this bit of a front that's going to kind of settle down maybe into the northern part of the Gulf of Mexico. And we'll have to watch and see if anything happens there. Canadian model, not very bullish on anything happening in the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico, other than that front just stalling out there. But the Icon model yesterday actually had a low pressure area developing over the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico here sometime about a week from today. And this model goes out a week from today, and you can see when it ends there's a lot of moisture over the eastern part of the Gulf of Mexico and maybe something wanting to wind up there somewhere south of the Florida Panhandle. So if there's going to be anything that's going to be affecting this particular region, it would probably be with the front. I really think there's more of a likelihood of a low developing on the front off the east coast and then making its way off into the Atlantic Ocean. Meanwhile, that ridge of high pressure is again kind of staying off a little bit farther toward the east. So if we were to get some tropical waves to come off the African coast, most likely those would turn away and keep everything out over the open waters of the Atlantic, which is probably the most likely scenario. And that would take us all the way to pretty much the end of August, keeping the Gulf Coast free of any tropical systems. But September, of course, is the busier month, and that's when the water temperatures really start to peak out. And the Gulf of Mexico is plenty warm to handle any tropical activity, and the tropical cyclone heat potential is quite high as well over the central and eastern Gulf. Southern part of the areas there around the Bahamas and Florida, and then the highest amount of heat potential is in the development zones over the Caribbean. So keep in mind, too, as you get a little bit farther into the hurricane season, going into mainly October, this is a big area for development. Now, sometimes they kind of drift in our direction. Most of the time, they kind of curve off toward the northeast. But if that high heat potential is there, October could also be quite the busy month. So let's quickly take a tour of the rest of the Atlantic Basin. We've got a bit of activity with thunderstorms that are developing in the offshore waters, and I think we'll see some more thunderstorms developing over land here in Louisiana. But for the most part, the Gulf of Mexico is nice and quiet, and outside of those showers and thunderstorms, winds and seas are fairly light in the waters as well. Seas probably running about 1 to 3, and the winds are generally out of the south. Central America looking very quiet, a couple of showers along the Panamanian coast, but the western Caribbean and really most of the Caribbean is very quiet. We've got a little bit of shower activity moving over parts of the Windward Islands, a bit of a tropical wave that's over the central part of the Atlantic, and then we've got another wave that's kind of made its way off the African coast here, neither of which are really showing up in the models, and the National Hurricane Center doesn't seem to be too interested in those tropical waves as well. But it is something that we'll continue to watch over the next several days, but I don't think we've got too much to worry about this weekend. What I am more concerned about, though, are the long-range forecast models are still calling for an above-normal hurricane season, and we're just now starting to get on the threshold of where we see most of this activity really start to ramp up going on into the month of September. So by the time we reach September the 10th, that's the peak of the hurricane season, but well more than 3/4 of all of our tropical systems happen basically in this range right here. So even though we've only had 5 named storms so far, the possibility of getting a dozen more still isn't out of the question. And during the month of August, we have a lot of development, but look at what happens during September, where you have even more development over the Atlantic and even a little bit more over the Gulf of Mexico as well. So something to look forward to. And that's why I keep saying make sure you've got all your preparations done now while things are nice and quiet out there, and you won't have to run around like crazy with the rest of the folks who've decided to procrastinate. If you have all your supplies now, it makes it a whole lot easier to really get yourself ready if something is threatening the northern Gulf Coast. So go ahead and continue to prepare, even though we don't have a lot of activity happening right now. I still think September and October could turn out to be very, very busy months, and really it only takes one tropical storm or hurricane to really mess up your day. Well, I hope you enjoy Let's Talk Tropics, and I'm so glad that the show is done here as we go into the weekend. If you like this live stream, please like the video and also subscribe to my channel. Turn on those notifications as well, and always know that you don't have to be here for the actual live event. Every one of the Let's Talk Tropics episodes and the Acadiana Weather Today morning shows are all saved on my YouTube channel, so you can go back and look and see if you missed anything, or you can catch up with Let's Talk Tropics and be a part of the conversation as we go forward. And at the same time, you can also look at my past work and see if I'm doing okay. I hope you all have a great weekend. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker, and I will see you on Monday.